So first I want to thank Dr. Amanda Dilger and Dr. Caren Solomon for coming and spending. I want to introduce our two speakers for today. The person on your screen, if you're in speaker view right now, is Dr. Caren Solomon. She's the deputy editor at the New England Journal of Medicine, an associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, and a physician at the Fish Center for Women's Health at Brigham and Women's Hospital. At the journal, her responsibilities include handling articles related to climate change and health, and she's published several articles addressing this issue. Dr. Solomon co-chairs the Medical Society Faculty Council's Subcommittee on Climate Change. Dr. Amanda Dilger is an instructor of otolaryngology, which is not easy to say, by the way, head and neck surgery at Harvard Medical School, and a fellowship-trained facial plastic and reconstructive surgeon at Mass Eye and Ear on the Cape. Her research is focused on improving sustainability within the operating room and addressing health disparities related to climate change. She's a member of Climate Code Blue, a co-founder of Surgeons for a Sustainable Future, and a co-founder of the Sustainable Working Group in the American Academy of Otolaryngology and Head and Neck Surgery. So thank you very much. And Dr. Solomon and Dr. Dilger, take it away.
Okay. Caren, do you want to share the slides?
So wait, I thought you wanted, do you want me to, I can certainly share them.
I can do it, yeah.
No, I got them. Don't worry.
Okay.
Let me go up to the top and do present view and wait, oops. Hold on one moment. Sorry, guys. Sharing screen more effectively. Is this? Let's see. I think. Okay. Are you seeing these slides?
Yes.
Okay, and then you want to just go up to the top, Amanda? I seem to be trapped in the middle.
Yep, I don't think I can click on it because it's your screen.
There you go. Okay, so then we want to get back into, hold on a second, the present mode. There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming. So we're going to talk about climate change, health, and advocacy today. So I'm going to talk about the climate change, the effects of health caused by climate change. And then Caren's going to talk about some local advocacy efforts. So next slide. So this is a graphic from the New England Journal of Medicine from an article from 2019 that shows some of the exposure pathways for some of the broader categories of climate change. And it's just a good summary of some of the things that we're going to talk about. So you can see from the graphic, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but up here in the upper left-hand corner. So with the increase in levels of carbon dioxide and short-lived climate pollutants, you get rising temperatures, rising sea levels, and increasing extreme weather events. So some of the bigger categories of climate change. And via these exposure pathways, they act on essentially all of the different categories of health. So there's over 100 different climate sensitive diseases as defined by the World Health Organization. And this includes heat related diseases, air quality, which can affect cardiovascular and respiratory disease, waterborne illnesses, infectious diseases, diseases related to malnutrition, and psychiatric diseases. So we'll go over a couple of those categories today. Next slide.
Okay, so why is my slide not advancing? Oh, there we go, back up.
There we go, perfect. So we'll start with particulate matter. So particulate matter is a mixture of airborne particles. So it includes carbon, ammonia, soil, nitrates, and sulfates, and it's divided into coarse and fine particulate matter. So PM10 is things like dust, pollen, mold, and it's around 2.5 to 10 microns in diameter. And you can see its width here relative to a hair follicle. And this mostly affects things like the sinus and the upper respiratory tract because of its size. So it's more associated with allergic disease. As opposed to PM 2.5, which is smaller than 2.5 microns in diameter. So that's things like combustion particles, organic compounds that's associated with wildfires, outdoor burning like wood stoves, or indoor burning like cooking on a stovetop. It's also associated with cars, particularly with diesel fuel, and also with things like dust from road and construction and agricultural operations. And because it's so much smaller, it's implicated in things like respiratory disease. And there's a lot of studies that show increased rates of particulate matter 2.5 are associated with increased rates of asthma and bronchitis. It can also have cardiovascular effects as well. So increased rates of heart attacks and cardiac arrhythmias, increases in hospital admissions and ER visits, school and work absences and restricted activity days. And this doesn't affect everyone equally. It's worse for children and the elderly, as well as those with pre-existing comorbidities. Next slide. In terms of heat, so we're seeing more frequent and longer heat waves. So overall, since pre-industrial time, so since about 1850, there's been a 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature. And there's been increases in heat wave frequency and heat wave season length. And you can see that this is more greatly affecting the South, particularly in the United States, and then globally, it's more of an issue in the global South. Next page.
Why do my slides sometimes not advance? You guys advise me? Is that okay?
I'm not sure. That's okay.
Okay.
Okay. and then in Massachusetts, in the 7th district in particular, so historically, you can see that the heat index, which is the combination of heat and humidity, there really were none of these extreme heat days, which are over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, where you're at risk for these really severe exacerbations of pre-existing conditions due to heat. But by mid-century, it's estimated that due to global warming, there's going to be, almost 3 weeks of these extreme heat days per month, per year. And then by the late century, almost a month of 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 19 days of 105 degrees Fahrenheit. If we can limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius, then we can significantly limit the number of extreme heat days that we see. And this will have great benefits for human health. Next slide. I just tried to click it myself. Okay. So
That might work better.
And not every place is heating at the same rate. So even within a city, the different areas are heating at different rates. So you can see here, this is a heat map of Richmond, Virginia, and it's next to a redlining map, which if you're not familiar with redlining, it was a practice in the 1930s where the federal government was determining the riskiness of certain areas based on who lived there. So in areas of the cities where there were more Black people living there, or if there were more immigrants, they would say that it was a risky neighborhood and you weren't able to get loans or mortgages to live there. And it perpetuated a cycle of divestment in those areas. So areas that were historically redlined still have less canopy cover and more asphalt than areas that were deemed favorable for housing loans. And you can see that, over almost 100 years later, over 100 cities across the United States are 5 to 12 degrees hotter than areas that were favorable for housing loans. So those are the areas that are in green, and that's, in all areas of the United States. And 5 degrees may not seem like a big deal, but every 1 degree during a heat wave increases your risk of dying by 2.5%. Next slide. And these are just some of the health effects that you see with extreme heat. So usually heat exacerbates existing medical conditions through things like dehydration. So people with pre-existing kidney problems or with cardiovascular disease and respiratory disease can have issues due to dehydration. It also can make air quality worse. So if you have asthma or pre-existing COPD, you can have more frequent asthma attacks or trips to the ER for worsening of your respiratory problems. For pregnant patients, we see increased risks of preterm birth and adverse birth outcomes such as low birth weight and infant death. And then in terms of mental health, we see increased aggression and violence, lower productivity, and increased risk of cerebrovascular disease like stroke. Next slide. So in terms of allergic disease, this is a picture of a cloud of pollen in southern Germany in 2018. So by both increasing temperatures and increasing CO2 levels in the atmosphere, we're having increasing levels of pollen, and that can contribute to allergic disease. So next slide. So this is in the Boston area. You can see that we've had over 2 weeks added to the ragweed pollen season between 1970 and now. And the same is true for, has been shown for other pollens as well, like grass pollens, which are in the summer. Next slide.
Did I miss a slide?
Whoop, that's okay.
There we go.
Yeah, so it's not just that the seasons are longer. When plants are exposed to more carbon dioxide, they actually emit more pollen. So as you can see, we're closer to around 370 parts per millimeter right now. But when you get up to closer to 600, we're getting much more pollen production. And this is for ragweed. And again, the same is true for grasses. When you expose them to higher levels of CO2 and ozone, they produce more pollen. So that means that for summer and fall allergen seasons, there's going to be more pollen production. And then for extreme weather events, for infectious diseases, climate change acts on them in a variety of ways. So increasing temperature and precipitation can expand their range. So for example, malaria is being seen at higher altitudes than it was previously seen at because of the increasing temperature. Forced migration does things like spread pathogens into areas that it previously wasn't seen, or put people in places where there are conditions with poor sanitation. So in areas like migrant camps where there may not be good access to clean water or adequate sanitation, you get increased water and vector-borne diseases. Next slide. So in the US, vector-borne diseases from mosquitoes, ticks, and fleas, the majority of which are from mosquitoes, have tripled in the past 13 years. And we've had 9 new vector-borne diseases that were reported in the United States and its territories. The most well-known maybe being Zika virus, which everyone may remember from 2015 to 2016, affected around 360,000 people in the United States. Next slide. And then with extreme weather events, you get risks of injuries directly from the event or from losing power afterwards, like we saw with the recent extreme weather in Texas, water contamination, mental health effects, things like that. So you can see obviously huge amounts of damage from hurricanes recently in 2019 and 2020. And 2020 in the United States had the most extreme weather events that we've seen in any year prior. Next slide. In terms of mental health, there's a multitude of different effects that climate change has on people. The severe weather events can cause PTSD and anxiety. When we see patients who are involved in migration, there can be interpersonal violence stemming from migrant camps that are not well policed. There can be breakdown in social structures. Slower moving catastrophes can contribute to internal conflict and civil unrest. And then on a larger scale, people have a lot of anxiety related to the ongoing climate change situation. Next slide. And then during Hurricane Maria, for example, but during any extreme weather event, like during the wildfires in California, you get disruption in medical services. So people with long-term chronic medical issues are unable to get their medication or unable to use respiration equipment. So patients that are on home oxygen, for example, are unable to use their equipment because of disruptions in electricity. Roads are damaged, and so they're unable to get to hospitals, facilities closed, or doctors unavailable. So this is a huge issue that we see with an increased number of severe weather events. Next slide. Okay, I'll turn it over to Caren.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much, Amanda. And Ricky, I have a quick question for you, because I know we want to leave time for discussion. Should we assess whether people could stay a few minutes later?
Yeah, let's, I'm gonna go into gallery so I can see people. I'm hoping if everybody can stay a little longer. Oh, because you're sharing your screen.
Oh, do you want me to unchair?
Well, no, I can see people.
Okay.
Can everybody give a thumbs up if you can stay longer? Okay, I don't see any thumbs down. I only see thumbs up. So go.
Great. Okay, good. I'll try not to take too long, but I want to talk. Okay, given the health consequences that Amanda's already talked about, the question is, what can we do? And so number one is actually how, given that some of these adverse effects are already affecting us and our families, et cetera, what are strategies for protecting health right now? And so I just want to point to a couple because they don't get talked about enough, I think, in primary care settings and such. And you guys should just be aware that those who are at particular risk from extreme heat, and Amanda's already alluded to this, but elderly, very young, those who are overweight or obese or have underlying cardiovascular or respiratory disease, cognitively impaired, those who are working outdoors in the hot sun, pregnant women, are all at risk. Also, people with certain diseases that require certain medications. So, for example, people with heart disease who are taking diuretics or people who are taking antihistamines tend to have problems with fluid balance or with temperature regulation. Most importantly, people who are socially isolated are at high risk. So if you look at studies of who has died in major heat waves, they're often people who are alone and nobody checked on them. So my little pearl here is just to make sure if you know individuals who are isolated and the days are getting up in the range that Amanda talked about, you want to check on people. And then what can you do? Well, obviously you don't want people hanging out outside in extreme heat. The problem is that they need air conditioning inside to be protected. So although air conditioning then has not good effects on climate change, it's actually imperative in the setting of extreme heat that people can cool and that they're drinking adequate fluids. And then everybody should be aware of symptoms and signs of heat-related illness. And obviously the particularly terrifying one is heat strokes, where people's core body temperature actually rises above 103. Sometimes they're no longer sweating, their skin can be dry, they can be confused, and that's a medical emergency. Then just quick point on air pollution. So again, people who have underlying, cardiovascular or respiratory disease, but also other groups listed here are at higher risk. And probably all of us, but particularly those groups, should be paying attention to information on the air quality index, which I think you guys know you can kind of find with the weather. And higher is bad. And if it's real high, so over 100 is quote unhealthy. But, depending on your physical status, really staying indoors when it's bad, not really exerting yourself outdoors. And then there are, other strategies one can use. But what I want to move on from is not just how we protect ourselves against what's already happening and happened, but to kind of get into like what we can do to mitigate and ultimately reduce the forces and the burning of fossil fuels that is causing all this. So just want to kind of point your attention to a very recent survey that made clear that still now, not even half of people state that they expect global warming to harm them personally. So I think we need to make people much, much, much more aware of these health effects. And then sort of other point on this slide is that only about a third of people are discussing global warming, at least occasionally. They're obviously not speaking with me or most of us in this meeting. But I think an important point is the role we can play by talking. So I typically show this slide when I'm giving talks to physicians, because if you look at who are trusted sources for climate change and health, primary care doctors come out, right at the top of the batch. Amanda, I'm not sure about ENT doctors, but I'm sure they're high as well. But if you look at number 2 on this slide, it's family and friends. So, I know the point was just brought up earlier, how do we engage more people so we're not all talking to ourselves? But I think the more we are reaching out and talking to friends and even sort of, acquaintances who aren't paying any attention to this, but there's somebody with whom we have some kind of relationship, I think we can engage people often by expressing, what we're doing and our concerns in this regard. I'm going to take just a moment for individual actions because I think they're all good, but I want to just preface any comment on them to say, as I think you guys all know, yeah, we should absolutely be energy efficient and we should have LED light bulbs and stuff, but the situation we are in obviously says that we have to make large societal changes and not just in our own homes individually. But I point to 2 of the higher impact ones to just note that they're also good for health. So switching from some meat to a much more plant-based diet and walking or riding one's bike instead of driving one's car, as you guys know, also have cardiovascular co-benefits. So they're, good for the environment and good for you. Okay, now much has already been said about this, but I bring it up again just to talk about the importance of engagement in advocacy at local, state, and or federal levels. And that can be in a minor way, signing petitions or kind of copying an email that somebody has sent you. And often, again, those of you here who are working with advocacy groups know that, we're kind of told about things we should weigh in on in terms of legislation or what have you, and it can be made very easy. But I think really sort of calling and meeting with representatives. Obviously, who you vote for matters. I want to say that, so Amanda mentioned Climate Code Blue, of which I am also a part, and we're a group of physicians that are particularly concerned about climate change and health, obviously, and environmental justice. In that regard. So really trying to amplify the voices of communities that are disproportionately affected. But I think in general for all of us, and I actually saw somebody put this in the chat and I was so glad that they said it. I think if we shift some of our messaging around the health effects, even if you're not a health professional, it's pretty compelling. I think everybody agrees that they want their kids to be able to grow up in a world where they can breathe the air and, right? So I think if we kind of focus on that, and actually the Lancet the year before this had a sort of report on climate change that very much focused on children and the incredible risk to children growing up today. So I kind of want to urge us all to, remember the health effects. And then when you're calling somebody or you're advocating for legislation, just make sure that's part of your plea. So just a few slides real quickly on advocacy in that regard. So this was a group of us at the State House protesting the Weymouth compressor station. I think you guys may have been familiar with that. And so, just sitting in environmental justice community, pouring out, carcinogens and methane and, whatever else with risk of explosion in a populated area where people already have respiratory disease. And again, particularly kids, have a lot of asthma. So there have been ongoing efforts to block this. It looked like, it now exists. I think you guys all know, but now it's actually at the federal government being re-reviewed through FERC in terms of, whether really the look at the environmental safety was adequate, which it was not. This is another piece of infrastructure that has come up. And again, I think many of you will be familiar with this, the Palmer Biomass plant in Springfield, another environmental justice community. You'll notice some theme here. This is considered the asthma capital of the US. And the idea is to plop this plant here that burns enormous amounts of wood and then puts out carbon and air pollutants, et cetera. And so there's been a move from the Baker administration to consider this to be renewable energy because it starts with trees. But as you guys well know, if you're burning tons of trees a day, it's kind of hard to grow them. They take some time. So this is another one where this issue about, asthma in kids and illness is really sort of a driving force for fighting this. I have one other that actually is my only one on our slides today that actually had a really nice outcome, which is you guys may be familiar with the fact that they were planning to cut down about 100 mature trees on Melnia Cass Boulevard in Roxbury. And again, here groups came together. So our group was involved, but multiple other local groups and environmental activists, et cetera. And, trees are, Amanda's, referred to them in terms of tree canopy and heat. They're also good for mental health. They're sucking air pollutants out of the air, just lots of positive things about trees other than that they're pretty. And actually the trees are saved there, but now I understand they're trying to cut down a bunch of trees in Charleston. So ongoing problem. But again, just to point out that actually getting involved, and I want to emphasize sort of different groups of us really working closely together and collaborating. So kind of a mixture of health professionals and then people coming at it from all different angles have really made a difference. So that's why fracking has been banned in several states. You guys may remember there's a successful lawsuit that curtailed public lands for fracking and drilling out in Wyoming in the last couple of years. And then obviously this issue of states beginning to commit to 100% renewable energy. Several have, and based on the talk earlier today and what we're reading in the paper, I'm hoping we're heading to the same. Let me just checking my time here. Rick, you want me to wrap this up or do you want me to talk more about this?
It seemed like people were willing to stay. If you maybe a couple more slides.
I'll do 2 more minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to mention, because it hasn't come up elsewhere, I want to mention the concept of divestment from the fossil fuel industry, because I think it's relevant for us personally in terms of our own, retirement accounts and stuff. And obviously then for like our, the organizations we work with, the schools we went to, et cetera. So this is just a slide. I don't intend to go through the tiny little lettering on the ground, but it shows you that over time, as global emissions have risen, the majority of which are coming from the big fossil fuel companies, The fossil fuel companies have been aware of this dating back over 50 years and essentially did nothing to help it. And in fact, invested their resources in sowing disinformation and, convincing politicians. And it's an ongoing issue, as you guys well know, of sort of lobbying of these industries affecting environmental policy. And so the concept between getting people to divest from fossil fuels and then to reinvest in renewable energy and other, healthful approaches is recognition, not just of the misleading of the public, but the fact that we're actually on track to exceed 1.5 degrees of warming if we only burn the current reserves of these companies, and many of them have plans to continue exploring. If we do what we need to do to safeguard health and protect our environment, these will be stranded, worthless assets at some period anyway. There's examples of effective divestment otherwise. So I bring this up because, I think it's worth just kind of looking at what your, retirement money is in, but also looking at the places you work, et cetera, and seeing if there is a role to push people. There's been an enormously broad divestment campaign that's been increasingly successful. So like billions of dollars have been divested at this point. This is just to remind you that sometimes we need to go out in the streets. That was from the Boston Climate March. And I'm going to just conclude with a quote from Greta Thunberg, who is a well-known climate activist who really got those climate strikes going, saying that adults keep saying we owe it to young people to give them hope. I don't want your hope. I want you to act. I want you to act as if the house was on fire, because it is. And therefore just conclude with the hope that we will work together urgently to fix this problem. Thanks.
Thank you. That was
tried to be fast. I hope people understood me.
Yes, it's very articulate, and thank you for getting through everything.
Let me get out of here.
If you could, stop sharing your screen. And
Beautiful.
I think, there are a couple of questions that came up in the chat that I can ask. I also think it's fine if we have a small enough group, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your own question. That would be fine. So if you could unmute yourself, ask your question. When that's done, go back to muting. So I see Ruth has her hand up. So Ruth, do you want to start?
Yes, and thank you. I'll ask my question, and then I'd like to take like 15 seconds and tell you why I'm asking it. The question is anyone here aware of any municipalities that are proposing that the town or city leadership adopt a heat policy statement for the municipality? Your graphs really caught my interest there. The background, I'm the chair of the Climate Action Advisory Committee here in Winchester. I'm running for the Board of Health on that interface between health and climate. I gave a presentation on the climate team Monday to the select board, and I gave them advance warning. We're going to be coming back to you in a couple of months with an ask. And I have an intern working on a 4 or 5 page policy statement, which makes the case and then says, dear select board, would you please say that heat is an issue of concern for Winchester, and with the implications of money allocation and so forth going forward. So that's the question. Has anyone got any ideas that?
Good question.
Thank
Great
you.
idea.
Yeah.
Does anybody in the audience know of any towns that are taking on an initiative like that?
This is Kim Slack from Concord. We have, we have proposed to put battery backups in our, in our senior center on the assumption that if we lose power and there's a heat wave, that we could protect senior citizens at that location. I also know that Cambridge, the city of Cambridge, has done an extensive climate resilience review, and they've identified vulnerable populations, nursing homes and the like, and have put together kind of a preliminary plan for how to address some of the health concerns from climate change. So I urge you, I don't know, I don't have the link right now, but I'm sure if you Google City of Cambridge Climate Resilience Plan, you could find that.
And one thing I was going to add is Amanda and I this is the group that we're with. We work with a group in Dorchester. It's the Codman Square Housing Development, and they have had initiatives to actually identify people who are at risk by virtue of either underlying, respiratory or cardiovascular diseases or age, and have, it's educational. They've also distributed air conditioners. So there was a grant. It was a bar grant, which I think Cambridge might have had one as well. You guys may know. But it literally was just to make sure that, people were going to be able to safely make it through these extreme heat days, especially because, people can, in theory, go to cooling centers, but that wasn't so appealing, obviously, this past summer, in the setting of all else.
Right. Thank you. That's helpful. I'm going to take a question from the chat. So Brian Campbell asks, do you agree with Canadian Asthma Society that nuclear power can prevent asthma and clean air? Well, I promote clean air. I'm sure you don't want to prevent clean air. Have you done any work in the area of using nuclear as an alternative energy or for health reasons?
Amanda, do you want to say anything in response to this?
I don't think I know too much about how much, what exactly nuclear emits in terms of, I'm sure it's cleaner than, the carbon emissions released by gas and fossil fuels, but I don't think I know too much. I don't think I've seen any papers on it in particular, so I don't know if I can speak to data in it. My assumption is that it's cleaner than fossil fuels, but I haven't seen any data on it in particular.
Yeah, I mean, and the only thing I'd add, I know there are many people who are speaking out in favor of nuclear, and there's a question, many people believe that we need nuclear in order to make this transition, but obviously nuclear carries its own risks. What do you do with the waste? What about, risks of an immediate, terrible catastrophe? So I can't say as I'm a fan, and I would say one of the issues here, I mean, you'll remember that people talked about natural gas as something that was pretty good, compared to oil and it, obviously it's not good, it's bad. Okay, so yeah, I think they obviously were making a comparison with, air quality effects of coal and gas, but I think we just have to remember it carries its own set of risks as well, so they have to be balanced.
Some of those risks are also health risks, and the statistics and information on it is very elusive because of the amount of time that it takes for radioactive particles to affect your health in a way that it becomes visible. So organ damage doesn't happen for a 20-year period, and it's very difficult to track that back to a radiological source. So it's a crapshoot, and not one that I'm willing to take.
Yeah, I'm sure many of us are with you. I want to ask a question that Georgia, and I like this question because it's very exciting to see our youth get involved. How do you suggest high schoolers get involved with climate justice and health in their communities?
So I'll start, and then Amanda, you should jump in. But so first of all, obviously, groups like the Sunrise Movement, which everybody is familiar with, I feel like there's lots of opportunities for young people to be involved, and they collaborate, with others. So I think, certainly kind of just beginning to kind of get involved in these questions. The other thing that I would add is, there are other, so there's our sort of small medical group, there's Physicians for Social Responsibility is another big group in Boston. And often all of us are very interested in, collaborative activities that are targeted to health and environmental justice. So I think if students were to come together and have ideas for something that they wanted to do, either in conjunction with Sunrise or whatever, there are, certainly groups of medical professionals who are interested in partnering and getting out that message.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. Here's a very relevant question. Do you think there will be greater number of contagious diseases such as COVID in the future?
Well, so COVID is a zoonotic disease. And so we don't know for sure that it's linked for climate changes, but with zoonotic diseases, anytime you have deforestation, there's an increased risk of humans coming into contact with animals, which increases the risk of spread of zoonotic diseases. So that's one thing that can increase the risk of having contagious diseases like COVID transmitted into humans. And then things like large-scale livestock farming can also increase the risks of zoonotic disease spread. So that's another reason to try and shift to a more plant-based diet, because it can help decrease areas where you can get more zoonotic spread. But that's just one of the ways that you can get an increase in contagious disease related to climate change.
Yeah. And I would also add, I mean, I think, you can never avoid talking about COVID in these kind of conferences, because we have to talk about COVID all the time. But as people have pointed out before, I mean, the links between sort of the mishandling of COVID and climate are like, they're pretty striking, right? Ignoring science, promoting misinformation, not having a functioning public health infrastructure. And I think one of the things we need to do is learn from this past year and then apply it to climate. And I know many people are talking about that now, but it's just critical, because you could see all the ways the system failed.
Yep. Thank you. Yes, it was quite a spotlight on all of the cracks in our system starting last March. I see Kathy has a question.
Yes, thank you. I came in late and I really kicking myself. I wish I'd come here first. I'm from Chelmsford. We're going to be, our small independent group, climate action team in Chelmsford will be bringing a resolution to town meeting. It's probably going to happen in June. There might be an a postponement of spring town meeting. But I know, it seems we talked about this in the larger meeting, that money is really what motivates a lot of people, saving money. I think there's one other motivation that might be stronger on many of us, and that's our children and their health. So I guess that would be one of the things I think that will help support getting our resolution passed here in Chelmsford, is to mention those things like asthma. There's also been talk here, we are on two major highways, 3 and 495, and I understand there's some particulates that can get into people's lungs and probably cause asthma, but maybe other things too. I guess what I need is a place to go so I can get all of those facts. Now, Ruth, you also mentioned the heat issue. And I know our senior center does have a big battery there. And when there's a power failure, people can go there, no matter their age, once they decide they're going to open it up for the public. But so I guess that's another thing, the heat issue. And I think that's what you were talking about. I think that's when I came in. I thought, okay. So I guess I wanted to know where I could go just to kind of get a list of those facts. And maybe I could even put a little fact sheet on our website. We have bought the domain Chelmsford Climate, chelmsfordclimate.org. So that would be a good place for us to send people to just a month or so before we go to town meeting. And I'm not sure who could kind of tell me more about that.
I was going to say, if you want to send us an email, so there a lot of organizations have information sheets that might be really helpful, like the American Lung Association and such, and probably, I'm guessing the pediatric associations might have similar, just like the relationship between air pollution and children's lung diseases, for example. So I could, we could dig something up pretty easily that exists and send it to you guys. Do you guys have something, Marcia? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, you need to unmute, Marcia.
Marcia, did you want to?
No, I'm sorry, I don't have.
Okay.
I thought, okay. Okay, I'm sorry, I thought you did. But,
I have a suggestion. A few years ago, we were doing a presentation somewhere, and I went to Climate Nexus, and they do work on communicating about climate change, and they have some fantastic charts and graphs and visuals on climate change and health. So
that's great.
that's just another resource. It's not coming from the medical, well, they pull from all different places. So
Okay.
they're a good place to just get any kind of graphics and data. But we can, Amanda and Caren
Mhm.
put their emails in the chat. So if you want to copy those
Oh,
out, if you
perfect.
want to write them to get information.
What about the Chan School? They did a study about the effects of COVID that had to do with health and how much more, how much worse they were in the more disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, I can put that link in the chat. It's
great.
easy to
Has
find.
that, Amanda, has that actually ever been published? I saw it as a preprint, but I don't know.
I
if
saw
ever
it, yeah,
it
they just have
published.
like a website with all the data on it. I never
Yeah.
actually saw the study on it.
Yeah. But you're right, Marcia, I mean, you're referring to more severe COVID in areas that have a lot of air pollution, which is a really important point. And that's,
It was talking about the particulate matter and the
Yep.
small size
Mhm.
particulate matter.
yep.
Mhm.
And it,
Okay.
again, it's like highlighting, if we're thinking of the COVID climate stuff, but also this issue of the communities that have disproportionately suffered and, how we have to figure out a way to address that fundamental problem.
Oh,
Do you
great.
have any information specifically about gas stoves in the home and the effect on asthma and respiratory diseases?
There's a great report. Andy Krasner, who works with our group and also works with PSR, put together a whole thing on that. So you guys, my memory is not good enough that I'm going to remember any of this. But again, if you shoot off an email, there's a great report
What's
that
the
exists.
email address?
It's in there. So I'm CG Solomon
I
at
don't
partners.
have a chat feature.
Oh, you don't have a chat. Okay.
I have the group chat, but not the chat for here, or I
Okay.
wouldn't be
Oh, well,
talking.
I'm gonna
okay.
give it. Yeah.
Well, I'll be saving the chat at the end. Everybody
Oh,
will
thank you.
get the information that's in the chat and the recording of this and all the other recordings in case you also wanted to go somewhere else. For instance, there was a session on the health effects of gas.
Yeah.
So you may want to look at that. And I'd also, the Rocky Mountain Institute did a great study on the health effects of gas. So that's another good resource for data. So I would point you there. I think we're going to have to wrap up with just, if anybody has one last question. Kathy, your hand is still up. Is that left up
Oh.
from before? Okay.
No, I guess I forgot to lower it, but
Okay,
it
that's
does
fine.
give me.
Let me just see if somebody who hasn't asked before has a
Okay.
question. Seeing none, as they say in town meeting. Kathy, if you have one more question, and then I'll just give you sort of some closing thoughts.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to ask about the recordings. Are they going to be emailed out to each of us? And
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll include that in my closing. So first, I want to thank Dr. Amanda Dilger and Dr. Caren Solomon for coming and spending the morning with us and on this very important topic on health effects. Boy, you can't not think about your health these days. So we appreciate your time and that you're willing to get back to people and give them some information that they're looking for. I want to thank you all for coming to the Sustainable Middlesex event. Overall, we will have more, maybe not until next year, but maybe we'll do something in between since there was such a huge turnout. And in fact, while it's nice to all be together, we can reach more people through Zoom. So that's been another interesting effect of COVID. Like I said, I'm recording this. You'll get the recording, you'll get the chat. Just thank you all for all the work you do in your communities, for everything, every day that you think about climate change. And I think it was Caren who was showing the email about how to raise up how many people are thinking about climate change, and it's talking to your friends, to your family. Talk to your doctor, ask your doctor, what are the health effects of living where I live? Things I should worry about. Have your doctor start thinking about climate change. Just keep the conversation at a high level. That forces our people who have the power to make institutional change. And then we all have the power to make change in our own communities. And let's use that power and make things happen. So thank you for coming.